Route 66, Arizona, 11:47 at night. The neon sign above the dusty road diner buzzed and flickered against the desert dark, throwing pink and gold light across an empty parking lot baked hard by decades of summer sun. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed their lonely frequency. The smell of burned coffee and old grease had soaked into the walls so deep it would never come out. It was the kind of place that had survived 3 recessions, 2 highway reroutes, and the slow death of everything that used to make small-town America feel like home. It had survived because people kept needing somewhere to stop, somewhere to sit down, somewhere to feel even for 20 minutes like somebody knew their name. Agnes Webb had worked here for 40 years. She knew every crack in every booth. She knew which burner ran hot and which coffee pot was slower than the other. She knew the sound of every regular's truck pulling into the lot before they ever pushed through the door. This diner was not just her job. It was the architecture of her entire life, built cup by cup, shift by shift over 4 decades of quiet, stubborn survival. Tonight she was closing alone. Patty Briggs had left at 10. The last customer, a trucker named Gerald, who always ordered the same thing and always tipped $3, had rolled out at 11:15. Agnes was wiping down the counter when she heard them pull in. Not one vehicle. 3. The engines cut out fast the way engines cut out when the people inside them don't want to announce themselves too early. She didn't look up right away. She had learned long ago not to show fear before she knew there was something to fear. 78 years had taught her that the face you put on in the first 3 seconds of anything usually determined how the next 3 hours went. The door opened. She looked up. 4 young men. The one in front was Shane Decker. She recognized him, unfortunately. Howard Decker's son, 25 years old with his father's jaw and none of his father's character. The other 3 she didn't know by name. She knew the type. Drunk. Loud inside their own heads. The kind of loud that doesn't make noise yet but is building toward it. Shane circled her, slowly, scissors open in his right hand, and 3 strands of silver hair already lay on the linoleum near her feet like snow that had fallen somewhere it was never meant to fall. His breath carried the sharp medicinal smell of whiskey taken in volume and haste. His eyes had the particular quality of a young man who has been building towards something all afternoon and is now committed to it past the point where backing down feels possible. Agnes Webb sat in this corner booth with her hands flat on the table and her back straight, and her eyes tracking Shane with the level, unflinching attention of a woman who had faced difficult things before and had developed over decades a quality of stillness that was not passivity, but its precise opposite. Patty Briggs pressed herself against the far wall near the coffee station with her phone in both hands, her face the color of the wall behind her. Then from far out in the desert night came a sound that nobody in that diner had been listening for, but that arrived anyway, low and rolling, like summer thunder moving in from the west. Not one engine, not 2. The unmistakable voice of several Harley-Davidson motorcycles moving together, growing closer, then cutting out one by one in the parking lot until the silence they left behind was somehow louder than the sound had been. Boots on asphalt, heavy, deliberate. The footsteps of men who had walked through worse darkness than this and come out the other side. The diner door opened. The man who stepped through first was 62 years old, 6'2", shoulders that still carried the shape of a younger man's strength, rounded now at the edges by time and weather, and the particular kind of weariness that only comes from surviving things other people didn't. He had gray hair cut close military short. A scar that began somewhere below the collar of his black t-shirt ran up the left side of his neck and ended at the arm in a pale ridge of healed tissue. His eyes swept the room with trained precision, taking in every detail in the first 3 seconds. His name was Cole Maddox. He saw Agnes first. He always saw her first. Then he saw the scissors in Shane Decker's hand. Then he saw the 3 strands of silver hair on the floor. And Cole Maddox took 1 step forward into the light, and behind him 6 more men filled the doorway and spread out in silence. Leather cuts and Hell's Angels patches catching the fluorescent glow, and the entire temperature of that small diner shifted from something dangerous into something else entirely. Something that felt to anyone who had ever been protected by a person stronger than themselves, like being pulled back from the edge of a very high place just before your foot found nothing but air. Cole's voice when it came was quiet, dangerously quiet. The voice of a man who had long ago learned that real authority doesn't need volume. "Boys," he said, "I think you're in the wrong place. That is where we need to stop." Because to understand what happened in that diner on that night, to understand why Cole Maddox drove 14 miles at midnight for a woman who had told him to stay away from her, why 6 men he trusted with his life pulled on their leathers, and mounted up without being asked twice. Why a promise made in the sand of a foreign desert 33 years ago was still alive and breathing in this fluorescent-lit room on Route 66, you have to go back. Not to yesterday. Much further than that. You have to go back to where it actually started. Because some stories don't begin when they begin. They begin decades earlier in a moment so loud it echoes forward through time, shaping everything that follows whether the people involved understand it or not. This story began in 1991, in the desert, in 7 minutes of blood and sand and a dying man's last words. But first, the garage. The garage in Flagstaff smelled like motor oil, old leather, and the particular brand of solitude that only men who have spent serious time alone know how to create. It wasn't a sad smell. It wasn't the smell of giving up. It was more like the smell of a man who had stripped his life down to what was necessary and found that stripped down that far, he could still function. Maybe not flourish, but function. Cole Maddox woke at 4:30 in the morning, the way he had woken at 4:30 in the morning for the better part of 4 decades. No alarm. His body had simply decided somewhere around age 23 that 4:30 was when consciousness happened. The desert came alive at 4:30. The sky started its argument with the dark. There was a brief window of stars and cold air, and absolute silence that felt to Cole like the only truly honest part of any given day. He sat up on the cot. The garage was dark except for the green glow of a clock on the workbench. His knees registered the cold concrete through the thin mattress in his left shoulder, the one that had been dislocated twice and repaired once surgically, and lived in a permanent state of disagreement with the rest of him ached in the dry pre-dawn air. 62. Not old by any standard he cared to acknowledge. But the body kept a ledger. Every mission, every mile, every cold morning and hard surface and injury he had walked off when walking it off was the only option. It all lived somewhere in the tissue waiting to remind him. He didn't look at the house next door anymore. Not before coffee. The house was dark, the way houses get dark when the person who made them a home is no longer in them. His wife Carol had been gone 4 years. The cancer had been fast, which people told him was a mercy. And he had nodded when they said it because they meant well, but mercy felt like the wrong word for something that had taken her in 6 months and left him standing in a kitchen that still smelled like her shampoo for 3 weeks after. He slept in the garage now. The cot was enough. The garage was honest in a way the house had stopped being. Cole stood his feet, finding the cold concrete floor, and crossed to the workbench. This was the ritual. This had been the ritual for 33 years, through every address and every deployment, in every city and every dead end, so ingrained now that his hands moved through it without being told. First the coffee. The ancient percolator on the far end of the bench, the one Carol had threatened to throw away at least a dozen times over the years, rattled and hissed into life. While it worked, Cole opened the small wooden box that sat on the shelf above the bench. Inside, wrapped in a square of old cloth that had once been a piece of desert camouflage, were the dog tags. He lifted them out. Felt the weight of them, that specific weight, the one he had carried in his hands and against his chest for over 3 decades, so constant a presence that there were hours when he forgot they were there, and other hours when they were all he could feel. Small rectangles of stamped metal on a chain edges, worn smooth from years of handling. Sutton Raymond K. 3147-266-01, OPOS USMC, Christian Raymond K. Sutton, Ray, Hawk, they'd called him Sergeant Raymond, Hawk Sutton USMC, who had laughed too loud and gambled too often and been the most quietly fearless man Cole had ever known, who had died in the sand of Kuwait on a Thursday afternoon in 1991, with Cole's hands pressed over wounds that both of them knew were not going to close. Cole held the tags for a moment the way he always held them. Then he looked at the wall. He had put the map up 11 years ago after the last apartment he'd lived in when he came off the road for good. Arizona and New Mexico printed large tape to the wall above the bench and covered now in red marker. 247 red X marks. Each one a name, an address, a drive or a flight, or a phone call that had ended the same way. Wrong woman, wrong age, wrong history. Another dead end. He had hired investigators 3 separate times over the years. He had driven to towns he couldn't have found on a map before. He had sat across from women named Agnes and Aggie, and sometimes just Agnes Sutton, or Agnes something else, who had looked at him with confusion or alarm, and none of whom had been the right pair of blue eyes. 247 failures. He had stopped counting at some point, then started again because counting felt like the only form of accountability that remained. He poured his coffee and walked to the garage door, and rolled it up and stood in the cold dark with the mug warming his hands, watching the stars make their slow exit over the mountain rim. This was also part of the ritual. 5 minutes of sky before the day started being a day. The coyotes were talking somewhere to the west. The sage smelled cold and clean. Flagstaff was quiet in the particular way cities are quiet at 4:30 when their inhabitants are still inside whatever dreams they're working through. Cole drank his coffee, thought about Ray, thought about Carol, thought about the map with 247 marks on it, and the spaces between the marks that still existed still held possibilities he hadn't fully exhausted. He was 62 years old. He had been looking for 21 years. There were men who would have stopped. There were men who would have called the promise fulfilled by effort alone and given themselves permission to be done. Cole Maddox was not those men. He went back inside and got dressed. Jeans worn soft from too many miles. Boots that had covered ground in 3 countries and 48 states. Black t-shirt. And then the leather vest with the Hells Angels 3-piece patch on the back. Top rocker Hells Angels. Center the death's head winged skull, the symbol that meant something very specific to the people who had earned the right to wear it. Bottom rocker, Arizona. He had earned this patch 15 years ago after he'd finally come home from the last overseas contract and found in the chapter's garage outside Flagstaff a kind of brotherhood he recognized from the Marines. Different structure, different code in some ways. But the foundation was the same. You showed up. You held the line. You did not abandon your brothers. And in return, they did not abandon you. It was not glamorous. It was not what the movie said it was. It was 11 men who knew each other's particular brands of damage and had agreed without ever sitting down and formally agreeing to carry those brands together. Cole strapped on his K-bar, the Marine combat knife he had carried since Desert Storm, checked his phone, his wallet, his keys. The ritual of preparing for the day unchanged since his first deployment. There was comfort in it, comfort in the predictability of his own habits when the world outside offered none. He was about to kick the Harley to life and ride into the morning when his phone buzzed. Not a text. A call. Unknown number, but the area code, he knew that area code. It belonged to Hartfield and Associates, the investigative firm he had contracted 6 months ago and mostly stopped expecting to hear from. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Maddox? A woman's voice. Professional. Careful in the way people are careful when they're about to say something that matters. This is Diane Caraway from Hartfield. I'm calling because we have a significant development on your case. Cole said nothing. He had learned through 2 previous investigators and years of false hope not to react until the information was actually in his hands. We've been tracking a social security trail tied to the name Agnes Sutton Webb, Diane Caraway continued. It's a hyphenated name she adopted after her marriage, which is why she's been difficult to locate through standard searches. She was born Agnes Sutton in 1946. Her brother was Raymond Kenneth Sutton, USMC, killed in action, 1991. Cole's hand tightened on the phone. She's currently employed as a waitress at a diner called the Dusty Road Diner on Route 66 in Kingman, Arizona. She's been living in a trailer park approximately 1 mile from the diner for the past 9 years. Before that, she was in Bullhead City. Before that, Phoenix. We have a high confidence match, Mr. Maddox, 93%. There was a sound in the garage that might have been Cole's breath leaving him, or might have been the wind off the mountain finally finding a gap in the wall. He wasn't sure which. Kingman, he said. Yes, sir. Kingman, Arizona, 14 miles from Flagstaff. He pulled up the map in his head, the actual geography of it, the roads he had driven 1,000 times in the past 9 years, doing chapter business and personal errands, and late-night rides that had no destination except the need to move. 14 miles. He had been searching in 47 states. He had hired 3 investigators and driven to cities he needed a map to find. He had marked 247 wrong addresses on the wall above his workbench. Agnes Webb had been living 14 miles away for 9 years. Mr. Maddox, are you still there? Yeah, his voice came out level. He had practiced level for a long time. I'm here. Send me the full report. He hung up and stood in the garage for a long moment, holding the phone, the dog tags still in his other hand. He looked at the map. He found Kingman. He found Flagstaff. He measured the distance between them with his thumb, the way soldiers measure distances on a field map when there's no ruler at hand. His thumb was not wide enough to cover the gap. There was almost nothing between them, a highway and a handful of exits. Cole set the dog tags down on the workbench next to the percolator. Then he picked up his helmet. He drove to the chapter clubhouse first. Not because he needed permission, because 30 years of operating as part of a unit had trained him to report to his brothers when something significant was happening. The Hells Angels, Arizona chapter clubhouse set off a dirt road outside Flagstaff, a cinder block building painted black with bikes parked outside that belonged to men currently inside drinking coffee and arguing about things that would have seemed trivial to outsiders, but mattered deeply to the people involved. Rex Donovan was at the head of the long wooden table when Cole walked in. 68 years old, former Green Beret with a gray beard braided at the chin and arms that told 40 years of story in ink. Rex had been chapter president for 12 years. He had seen Cole Maddox through the death of his wife, through 2 serious injuries, through the particular brand of quiet grief that attaches itself to men who carry old promises. He could read Cole's walk the way a ship's captain reads weather. "You look like something happened," Rex said. Something happened. Cole told them. He told them about the call, about Kingman, about the 14 miles. He told them about Ray Sutton. Most of them knew the story in outline, but he told it again because it was important to say it in full before asking for anything. He told them about Kuwait, about the shrapnel, about the promise. He told them about 21 years of searching. When he finished, the room was quiet. Bishop at Coles left 49 years old, built like a doorframe, the quietest man in the chapter, and usually the one most worth listening to, looked at his coffee. "You going today?" "I'm going today." "You want backup?" Cole thought about it. "Not yet. This first conversation needs to be just me." Rex nodded slowly. "You find her Ironside, and you call us when you need us. Not if, when." Cole drove the 14 miles in the morning light with the desert opening around him. The way it opens at 9 in the morning in October, the rock formations catching the angle of the sun and turning colors that had no names in ordinary use, amber and ochre, and a deep red that wasn't quite red. He had ridden this stretch of highway 100 times. He had never known what was waiting at the other end of it. The Dusty Road Diner was smaller than he'd imagined it, though he'd tried not to imagine it. Low and flat, a painted sign above the door faded by sun to something approximating its original colors, a parking lot of packed dirt with a few pickups scattered across it. The kind of place Route 66 had 50 of each one, almost identical each one, carrying 20 or 30 years of other people's lives soaked into its walls. Cole parked, sat for a moment. He had rehearsed this conversation approximately 10,000 times over 21 years of not being able to have it. In his head, it had taken every shape possible: joyful, difficult, tearful, awkward, brief. None of those rehearsals had done a thing to prepare him for what was actually about to happen, which he understood in the way you understand physics theoretically without being able to feel it until the floor comes up to meet you. He walked in. The lunch crowd had thinned to nothing. 2 older men at the counter with coffee, a booth by the window with a family still working through their plates, and behind the counter a woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, moving between the coffee maker and the register with the easy economy of someone who had performed these exact movements so many times they had become instinct. She looked up when the door chimed. Cole Maddox had carried a photograph of Agnes Sutton for 21 years. First a photocopy of Ray's own photograph, later a better scan recently, a high-resolution image from the investigator's search. He had looked at it enough times to know her face in the way you know very few things completely and without effort. None of that had prepared him for the eyes. Ray Sutton's eyes. The same specific shade of blue-gray that Cole had looked into in the last 7 minutes of Ray's life and had never forgotten. It was a color that belonged to one family and one family only, and Cole had encountered it exactly once in 33 years and recognized it across a diner in Kingman, Arizona, without a single second of doubt. He walked to the counter and sat down. She was watching him with the professional wariness of a woman who had worked in public-facing establishments long enough to read people quickly. "Coffee," she said. "Please, black." She poured it, set it in front of him, started to move away. Cole reached into the inside pocket of his cut and took out the thing he had been carrying close to his heart every day for 33 years. He set it on the counter between them, gently, the way you set down something that might shatter. Ray's dog tags. She didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then slowly she turned back to the counter. Her eyes found the tags. Something passed across her face that he couldn't name, a weather system of emotion too complex and too fast for a single word. Her hand reached out, picked them up. Her fingers moved over the stamped letters. Sutton Raymond K. The coffee pot slipped from her other hand, hit the rubber mat behind the counter, and didn't break, but the sound of it was loud in the quiet diner. "Where did you get these?" she said. Not a question. The voice of a woman controlling what she could control. "Kuwait," Cole said. 1991, Desert Storm. He paused. Ray was my brother, not by blood, by every other measure that matters. He saved my life. And when he was dying, he made me promise to find you, to protect you the way he couldn't. Agnes Webb put the dog tags back down on the counter. She set them down precisely carefully as though she was returning something to a museum display case. Then she gripped the edge of the counter with both hands and looked at him. And what was in her face was not the relief or the gratitude or the grief breaking open that he had in some corner of himself allowed himself to imagine might be there. What was in her face was anger, clean old earned anger. "You're 33 years late," she said. Cole held her gaze. He had nothing to say to that because she was right. "Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" Her voice was low, not performative. This was not a woman making a scene. This was a woman telling the truth. 33 years. I waited. I waited when he first died because Ray told me, he told me in his last letter, he told me there was a man named Cole Maddox, and if anything happened, that man would come. So I waited. A month, 6 months, a year. She stopped, breathed. "I hired someone to look for you in 1997. Did you know that I spent $400 I didn't have, and they told me there was no trace of you, and I thought you were dead?" Something struck Cole behind the sternum, though he kept his face level. "I wrote letters to the Marine Corps, 3 of them. Nobody wrote back with anything useful. I looked for you until I ran out of ways to look, and then I—" She stopped again. Something in her expression shifted, some layer of the anger thinning to show the exhaustion beneath it vast and old. "And then I stopped. I decided you were gone, or you didn't care, or Ray had been wrong about you. And I built a life without the promise. I stopped waiting." She reached out and picked up the dog tags one more time, held them in her closed fist. Then she held them out to him, returned them. Her face had gone back to something controlled and distant, the face of a woman who had survived every previous difficulty by keeping very careful charge of her own emotions. "I don't need protecting," she said. "I've been protecting myself for 33 years. Take your dog tags, take your apologies, and please leave." Cole picked up the tags. He looked at her for a moment, at the face of the woman he had promised to find, at the set of a jaw that carried 40 years of hard work, at the anger and hurt and decades of waiting written across her in ways that no amount of explanation could undo. Then he took out his wallet, put $20 on the counter for the coffee he hadn't touched, and wrote his phone number on the bill in the neat, precise print of someone who has learned to make information legible under difficult conditions. He stood. "I understand," he said, "and I'm sorry. Not just for being late, for what the wait cost you. I can't pay that back." He tucked the dog tags back into his pocket. "But I'm not leaving Flagstaff. And if you ever need anything, anything at all, that number is yours." He walked out. The door chimed behind him. He stood in the parking lot for a long moment in the October sun, breathing the clean, dry air of the desert, and felt the full weight of 21 years of searching collide with the strange reality of having found the thing you were searching for and having it handed back to you. His phone buzzed. "Rex, you okay?" He typed back. "Complicated. Tell you later." He rode back to Flagstaff with the desert wind in his face and Ray Sutton's voice in his ears, the way it always was on the hard days. Just her name, just the shape of what Ray had been asking him to do, carrying more urgency than anything a living person had said to Cole in years. What Cole didn't know yet, what he would learn only later in pieces through the particular web of connection that small communities build around the people they love, was what had been accumulating around Agnes Webb, while he'd been spending 21 years looking in the wrong direction. He didn't know about Howard Decker yet, about the handshake deal and the trailer park and the 25 years of on-time rent paid in cash every month by a woman who kept meticulous records because she had learned the hard way that a handshake meant nothing if the other person's children didn't honor it. He didn't know about Shane Decker, about the casino debt, about Victor Crane and what Victor Crane actually was underneath the developer's suit in the legal language and the business cards with the embossed logo. He didn't know about the sealed envelope in the kitchen drawer at the Dusty Road Diner. He didn't know about Danny. He didn't know any of it yet. But the chapter knew things, and the chapter had a way of knowing more things quickly when they needed to. And Rex Donovan had spent the afternoon making calls while Cole drove to Kingman and drove back, and by the time Cole walked into the clubhouse that evening, the picture had already begun to take shape. Shane Decker was 25 years old, and he had been born into the particular misfortune of being talented enough to believe he was exceptional. His father, Howard Decker, had built a small but solid real estate holding over 40 years of honest work in Mojave County land, mostly the kind of land that didn't look like much until suddenly it was in the path of something larger. Howard had been a good man in the specific, unglamorous way that good men operate, keeping his word, treating tenants fairly, maintaining his properties, dying without fanfare in August of this year, at 71, leaving behind a will that had seemed straightforward until you read it carefully. Shane had been at 19 a wide receiver on a junior college team with legitimate Division II prospects and a way of moving on a football field that made people stop and watch. Then came the knee. One bad cut on a damp field in Tucson, one ligament unwilling to do what ligaments are supposed to do, and the future Shane had been building in his head dismantled itself in the time it took to hit the turf. He came home. He tried a few things. He found in the temporary relief of a blackjack table a feeling that was close enough to the adrenaline of competition to serve as a substitute. For a while, then for a little while longer. Then it stopped being a substitute and started being the thing itself, and the amounts got larger, and the temporary relief got shorter, and the gap between what he owed and what he had available became a number that produced a specific physical sensation in his chest every morning when he woke up. His father had known about the gambling in a general way, had bailed Shane out twice, had sat him down, twice had told him twice what he needed to hear in the clear-eyed, non-dramatic way Howard Decker delivered hard truths. The third time Howard would have sat him down, Howard was already sick. The cancer moved fast the way it sometimes does in the desert, as though the dry heat accelerates everything it touches. Howard Decker died in August, owing a great deal of love and very little money. Shane inherited the properties and a debt the properties could have managed, except that the debt wasn't to a bank. It was to a man named Kelso, who operated out of Bullhead City and who had been very patient for 18 months and was no longer interested in patience. Victor Crane had appeared in September, 3 weeks after Howard's funeral, with a business card and a number and a smile that sat on his face like something that had been placed there by someone who had read a description of smiling and done their best. Crane's company, Sunpath Acquisitions, was buying up a corridor of Route 66 land outside Kingman for what he described as a mixed-use development project. He needed Howard Decker's land. He needed the trailer park that sat on that land. He needed the Dusty Road Diner property. He needed specifically the long-term tenancy agreement that had been the last significant holdout in his corridor. Agnes Webb's presence on that land was in Victor Crane's calculation a problem with a straightforward solution. Shane Decker, desperate, had agreed to be that solution. The first thing he had done was triple the rent. Agnes, who had been paying $300 a month since 1999, received a certified letter in October informing her that effective 60 days hence, her monthly rental would be $900. On a waitress's salary working 5 days a week at the Dusty Road Diner, this was not a number that existed in any possible version of her budget. The second thing Shane had done was file an eviction notice under Arizona's month-to-month tenancy law, which permitted termination with 30 days notice, regardless of the length of tenancy, regardless of the payment history, regardless of the 25 years Agnes Webb had treated that trailer and that land with the same care she gave everything in her life. The notice arrived on a Tuesday morning. Agnes had been standing behind the counter, reading it when Patty Briggs came in through the back. Patty Briggs had been waitressing at the Dusty Road Diner for 11 years. She was 55 years old with the direct communication style of a woman who has decided somewhere along the way that things can be faced head-on or not at all. She had watched Agnes for 11 years, the way you watch a person who is stronger than anyone gives them credit for, which is with a mixture of admiration and worry and the occasional desperate wish that they would let someone help them. In the kitchen before opening, when it was just the two of them, and the coffee was still brewing, Patty sometimes called her Aggie, the name people used when they meant something by it, the name that said this woman was more than the job, more than the uniform, more than the 40 years of shifts. Patty found Agnes sitting on a kitchen stool holding the eviction notice, and she did what she always did, which was say exactly what needed to be said, with no preparation and no softening. 30 days, Agnes said. She was not crying. She was looking at the paper with the expression of someone adding numbers that don't add up. I have 30 days. I have nowhere to go. I've been saving, but not enough for first month, last month, and deposit anywhere else. And who rents to a 78-year-old waitress? Patty pulled a stool up beside her. She thought about the biker who had come in 3 days ago. The one with the scar and the Hells Angels cut, who had put dog tags on the counter and said things that had made Agnes cry. She had asked around the way Patty asked around when things concerned Agnes, and what she had found had surprised her. She had found out about Cole Maddox through Bishop's wife Loretta, who was in the same book club as the wife of a man who knew Rex Donovan. She had found out that Cole had been looking for Agnes for 21 years. She had found out that he had driven to 47 states in pursuit of a promise made to a dying man. She had found out that he was, by every account she could gather, a man who kept his word, even when keeping it cost him everything. She hadn't told Agnes any of this yet. She had been waiting for the right moment. 30 days seemed like the right moment. Agnes, she said carefully, that man who came in, the one with the dog tags. Agnes's expression did not change, but something in her stillness shifted. My friend knows his people. She says he's been looking for you for over 20 years. Patty let that settle. She says he made a promise to your brother and never stopped trying to keep it. He told me that. Do you believe him? A long pause. Agnes looked at the eviction notice, then at the $20 bill still in her apron pocket. She hadn't thrown it away. She had been carrying it since the moment Cole left, and she hadn't been able to explain to herself why. I don't know what I believe anymore, she said. You don't have to trust him, Patty said. You don't have to let him help. I'm just saying don't close all the doors. Not when Shane Decker is trying to throw you out into the street. Agnes put the eviction notice in her apron pocket. Oshiban stood, straightened the set of her shoulders in the way she had been straightening her shoulders for 40 years, the habit of a woman who had decided long ago that whatever else she did, she would not let them see her bend. I've got tables to open, she said, but she didn't throw the eviction notice away, and she didn't throw away the $20 bill with the phone number written on the back in neat, precise print. Cole didn't sleep well that night. This was not unusual. Sleep had been a negotiation since Kuwait, a territory he entered with a certain amount of preparation and exited with varying degrees of success. But this particular night, the night after finding Agnes, the night after being told to leave by the face of the woman he had promised to find, was worse than the ordinary kind of bad night. He sat in the garage at 2 in the morning with cold coffee and the dog tags in his hand, and he thought about 33 years from her side. He thought about a woman in her mid-40s writing letters to the Marine Corps. He thought about $400 she didn't have and an investigator who hadn't found him. He thought about what it must have meant to wait, really wait the way soldiers' families wait, and then to stop waiting to make the calculation that the promise was not going to be kept, to build an entire architecture of survival around its absence. He thought about the eviction notice Rex had mentioned on the phone, about Shane Decker, about what was actually happening in Agnes Webb's life while he had been sitting 14 miles away, not knowing she existed. He put the dog tags back in the box. He looked at the map. 247 X marks and the one address he had never needed to mark because it had been 14 miles away the whole time. He would give her space. He would give her whatever she needed, but he would not leave Kingman unsecured. So he drove there. He parked down the road from the trailer park far enough that he was just another truck on the shoulder of the road at 2 in the morning, and he watched the lights. Agnes's trailer had one window lit, bedroom light. She was awake too. He watched it for an hour. Then the light went out. He sat in the dark a little longer, listening to the desert, and thought about Ray Sutton, and thought about a promise, and thought about what it cost to keep something all the way to the end of your strength, and then to discover that the end of your strength was not actually the end of what was required. Then he started the truck and drove back to Flagstaff. The clock on the eviction notice was running. 30 days. Cole had been late once already. He did not intend to be late again. The chapter meeting the next morning was not Rex's idea. It was Cole's, and the distinction mattered, because when Cole Maddox called a meeting, the 11 men who comprised the Hells Angels Arizona chapter understood that whatever was coming through that door was not routine business. Cole was not a man who called meetings. He was a man who showed up to them, contributed what was needed, and went back to work. The fact that he had sent a message to the group thread at 6 in the morning asking for everyone present by 9 said more than the message itself. They were all there by 8:45. The clubhouse smelled the way it always smelled: cigarettes and leather, and the industrial-grade coffee that Bishop made every morning in a pot large enough to hydrate a fire crew. The long wooden table in the center of the room had been scarred by 15 years of chapter meetings, the surface carrying the history of everything that had been decided here in rings and gouges, and the occasional mark that someone had put there during a particularly long discussion about club finances. The walls held photographs, members past and present, runs and rallies, men who had come through this chapter and men who had not come back from the road. The Hells Angels did not forget their dead. They kept the names. Cole stood at one end of the table. He did not sit. Standing was not a power move with Cole. It was a concentration of focus, the physical posture of a man who needed his whole body involved in what he was saying. He told them everything. Not the abbreviated version he had given Rex the day before, but the full account. Kuwait Ray, the promise, the 21 years the investigators call Kingman Agnes, the eviction notice. When he described finding Agnes after all those years, only to be told to leave the room, didn't offer sympathy. These were not men who trafficked in sympathy. What they offered was something more useful: attention. Complete undivided tactical attention. When he finished, Bishop was the first one to speak. Bishop's real name was Terrence Aldrich. He was 49 years old, built with the density of a man who had spent serious time doing serious physical work, with a face that had been rearranged once by a bar fight and once by a motorcycle accident, and had settled into a configuration that was, if not handsome, deeply legible. Bishop was the chapter's clearest thinker. He processed out loud but slowly the way a careful engine processes fuel. "The developer," Bishop said. "Victor Crane, Sunpath Acquisitions. I know that name." Everyone looked at him. "From where?" Rex asked. "Bullhead City, 3 years ago, a property dispute, a retired couple, Norma and Ellis Bird. They'd been on their land for 30 years, and suddenly there was a development company trying to force them out. The company was called something else then. Sunpath is newer." He paused. "The Birds lost their land. I heard afterward that the development never happened. The land sat empty." The room was quiet for a moment. "That's a pattern," Knox said. Knox was the chapter's most legally literate member, partly from necessity and partly from temperament. He had a cousin who worked in the Mojave County Assessor's Office, and he had a way of knowing things about property transactions that would have surprised people who assumed motorcycle club members didn't follow real estate law. "That's not just a pattern," Rex said. His stillness had changed quality the way a man gets still when something has moved from interesting to important. "That's a method." Rex looked at Bishop. "I need you to dig into Crane, not surface level. Everything. Financial history, principles, who he's connected to, where his money actually comes from." Bishop nodded once. "Knox, you talk to your contact at the assessor's office. I want to know the exact legal status of Agnes Webb's tenancy. I want to know what the Decker estate's obligations are and whether there are any instruments in Howard Decker's will that Shane might have missed. People miss things in wills when they're desperate and reading fast." Knox was already writing. "Wade, Gunner, I want a general picture of Shane Decker, where he goes, who he talks to, how bad the debt situation actually is." Wade and Gunner nodded together. Rex turned to Cole last. "You stay away from Agnes for now. I know that goes against every instinct you have. But if we're going to help her, we cannot do it by making her feel surrounded by people she hasn't chosen to let in. You give her space. You watch from a distance. And when she's ready to open the door, you'll know." Cole held Rex's gaze for a moment. 30 years of discipline told him Rex was right. Every cell in his body reminded him the eviction notice said 30 days and 2 had already passed. What if something happens before she's ready? "Then we handle it," Rex said simply. "That's what brothers do." The men dispersed to their assigned tasks with the quiet efficiency of a unit that has long ago stopped needing to discuss how to operate. This was the thing civilians consistently misunderstood about the Hells Angels, and Cole had never bothered to correct them because the misunderstanding served a useful function. They thought biker club meant chaos. They thought leather patches and loud engines meant disorganization, impulsivity, men making decisions with their fists before their heads. What the Hells Angels Arizona chapter actually operated like was a small, experienced, highly networked intelligence unit with motorcycles and a clubhouse and a very low tolerance for anyone threatening the people they had decided to protect. Cole rode back toward Kingman. He told himself he was just riding. The desert in October had a particular beauty, the light low and golden, the air dry and carrying the smell of sage that had been baking all summer and was now releasing it slowly in the cooling months. He found himself at 11 in the morning, parked on the shoulder of the highway near the trailer park. Not close. Far enough to be invisible. Nothing happened. Agnes's car was not in the lot, she was at the diner. He pulled back out and rode past. Her car was in the diner lot, old. A faded sedan, with a rear fender beginning to bubble with rust, the left rear tire looking soft in the way of a slow leak that had been ignored too long. He noted this the way he noted everything automatically because he had been trained to understand that the details you overlook are the details that cause problems later. He did not stop. He rode on. That night, he came back, parked down the road, and watched the trailer park until Agnes's window went dark. He told himself this was the last time he would do this. He told himself that every night for 3 nights. On the 4th night, with the eviction clock at 26 days remaining, Patty Briggs called him. He had given Patty his number through a chain of connection he'd set up carefully, knowing that direct contact with Agnes would only push her further away. This call was different from the brief one before. "She's not sleeping," Patty said with the directness of a woman who has no patience for preamble. "She's up every night, I can tell, because she comes in early and she has that look. When someone has been lying in the dark fighting things instead of sleeping." Cole knew the look. "She keeps the $20 bill in her register drawer," Patty continued. "I saw her take it out twice last week and just hold it." Cole was quiet for a moment. "I think she wants to call you," Patty said. "I think she's been wanting to call you since the day you walked in. But she's been alone for a long time, Cole. She's built something out of that, not just a way of living an identity, the woman who handled it herself. If you take that away from her by forcing your help on her, you'll lose her. But if you find another way to be present without requiring anything from her, I think she'll find her way to the door herself." Cole turned this over. "What does she need right now? Practically." "Her car's about to die. Left rear tire is losing air slowly. She's been topping it off at the gas station every few days rather than buying a new one." Cole had noticed the same tire. "She won't accept a tire from you directly," Patty said. "But if it happened to get fixed while the car was sitting in the diner lot overnight, she'd probably just be grateful without asking too many questions." Cole did not say anything for a moment. Then, "Patty, there's something else I need to ask you about. Agnes has a son, Danny Webb Jr. I pulled what I could from public records, but the trail goes cold 3 years ago." A long pause on Patty's end, the pause of someone deciding how much of a hard truth to hand over at once. "Danny had a bad accident about 6 years ago," Patty said. "Rear-ended at an intersection, fractured 2 vertebrae. They put him on pain medication and then more pain medication, and then he was just in it. You know how that went for a lot of people." Cole knew. "He showed up here about 3 years ago. Thin, wrong kind of thin. He needed money and Agnes gave him what she had, and then he took what she hadn't given him too, from the register. A few $100s, which was most of what she'd saved that month." Patty's voice went quieter. "He hit her, not badly, once, but once was enough. He left before she could call anyone, and she hasn't heard from him since." Cole held the phone very still. "She keeps his last known address inside the kitchen cabinet. She checks it sometimes when she thinks no one is watching. And there's a letter and envelope. It's been sitting in the kitchen drawer next to the register for 6 months now. Return address is a treatment facility in Albuquerque." His handwriting on the envelope. Patty stopped. "She's never opened it." Cole closed his eyes for a moment. "She knows it's there," Patty continued. "She sees it every single day. I don't know if she's afraid it says something bad or afraid it says something good. Maybe both." After Cole hung up, he sat in the truck for a long time in the dark outside the trailer park. He thought about Agnes putting Ray's dog tags down on the counter. He thought about her saying 33 years. He thought about the letter sitting unopened in the kitchen drawer of the Dusty Road Diner for 6 months, while a woman came to work every day and looked at it and chose each time not to open it. He thought about what Ray had asked of him. Not the simple version, the larger version implicit in every word Ray had said in those 7 minutes. Make sure she has someone. Make sure the woman who took care of me when our parents died doesn't have to take care of herself forever with no one watching her back. Cole drove to the diner lot that night after midnight, after Agnes's window had gone dark. He changed the tire in 20 minutes by flashlight, working quiet and fast. He put the old tire in the bed of his truck and drove away. He left no note. He figured she'd know. The information from Bishop came in on day 23 of the 30, and it arrived in pieces, each layer darker than the last. Victor Crane was 44 years old. He had started Sunpath Acquisitions 7 years ago, after a previous development company he'd been associated with had dissolved under circumstances that attracted regulatory interest, but not ultimately criminal charges. He had 3 completed projects in the past 6 years. All 3 had followed the same pattern: acquisition of a quarter of underdeveloped land, combination of willing sellers and unwilling holdouts. And then after the acquisitions were complete, long delays in actual development. 2 of the 3 quarters remained largely undeveloped years later. That was the surface layer. Underneath it was the company. Victor Crane had 2 known associates whose backgrounds were considerably less clean than his own men, whose names appeared in federal filings related to organized crime investigations out of Phoenix and Las Vegas. Not charged. Present on the periphery, in the kind of way that suggested awareness of what was happening without quite sufficient evidence for prosecution. The layer underneath that was what Bishop had found through a contact who worked in financial services and owed Bishop a favor of the kind that generates complete candor. Victor Crane's land acquisitions were not primarily about developing land. They were about moving money through property transactions, buying at one value, transferring at another, creating paper trails that converted funds of questionable origin into legitimate equity. The development projects were real enough to be credible, slow enough to delay scrutiny, and the corridors of Route 66 land he was currently acquiring were worth considerably more as financial instruments than as resort developments. Shane Decker did not know any of this. He had a desperate need, and Victor Crane had appeared with the solution, and Shane had grabbed the solution without asking what it was attached to. Knox's news about the will came the same day. Howard Decker had been a careful man. His will had been prepared by a Kingman attorney, not Victor Crane's attorney, a different one, older, semi-retired, a man who had known Howard for 20 years, and had prepared the document according to Howard's specific and detailed instructions. Among those instructions was a handwritten addendum attached to the will as Exhibit C, notarized and legally binding, which specified that in the event of the sale of any portion of the Decker Estates Route 66 holdings, any long-term tenant of 5 years or more would have right of first refusal at a price calculated from the cumulative rent paid over the duration of their tenancy. Agnes Webb had been a tenant for 25 years. At $300 a month for the first 10 years and $350 for the last 15, the cumulative figure was approximately $93,000. The current assessed value of the land her trailer occupied was $112,000. Victor Crane was offering $600,000. Howard Decker's addendum meant that before Shane could sell to Crane, he was legally obligated to offer the property to Agnes at the calculated price, or at minimum to notify her of the right. Shane's attorney, Crane's attorney, the one handling the paperwork, had buried Exhibit C in a stack of supporting documentation that would take a careful reader several hours to work through. Shane had not read it carefully. He had been reading one number in his head since August, what he owed Kelso, and how many days remained before that number stopped being theoretical. Knox laid all of this out at the second chapter meeting on day 22 of the 30. The room was quiet when he finished. Rex looked at Cole. She has legal standing. The addendum is enforceable. She can't afford the land at assessed value, Cole said. Not on a waitress's salary. No, but she has the right, and the right changes the entire equation. Rex looked around the table. If we can get her legal representation and bring this addendum to light, Shane Decker cannot legally complete the sale to Crane without first offering Agnes her option, which means Crane's timeline collapses, which means the whole structure starts to come apart. Shane won't take that quietly, Wade said. No, Cole agreed. He won't. Cole drove to Kingman that afternoon, not to the diner directly. He sat in the courthouse parking lot for 20 minutes thinking about the best approach. Then he drove to the diner. It was mid-afternoon, the slow window between the lunch crowd and the dinner rush. 2 customers at the counter. Patty refilling salt shakers at the end booth. Agnes behind the counter going through receipts. She looked up when the door chimed. She looked at him for a moment, not with the anger of their first meeting, but with something more complicated. The expression of a person who has been thinking about someone and is not entirely comfortable being caught in the act of it. The tire, she said. He sat down at the counter. Coffee if it's not too much trouble. She poured it without being asked this time. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. She set the pot down, stood across the counter from him with her hands flat on the formica. She had the posture of a woman preparing to say something she had been preparing to say for several days. I found something out, she said, about Shane Decker, about the eviction. She reached under the counter and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a photocopy of something official, county letterhead. A woman I know from church, her husband works at the courthouse. She pushed the paper toward Cole. He looked at it. Exhibit C from Howard Decker's will. Knox's contact had apparently not been the only one with access. You already know about this, Agnes said. It was not a question. My chapter found it 2 days ago. We were trying to figure out the best way to tell you. Agnes was quiet for a moment. She picked up the photocopy and looked at it, though she had clearly already read it several times. Howard knew, she said. He knew this might happen someday. He put that in there for me. Cole said nothing. He let her work through it. Shane's attorney never mentioned it, she said. Shane's attorney is Victor Crane's attorney. She looked at him directly. What is Victor Crane? Cole chose his words carefully. He is someone who uses legitimate business as cover for illegitimate money. My brothers have been looking into it. There's enough that we've passed information to federal contacts, but that process takes time, and you don't have a lot of time. He paused. 19 days. Agnes absorbed this. The diner hummed around them. The ceiling fan turned its slow circle overhead. My car tire, she said again more quietly. You were topping off the air every few days. I know, I was going to get to it. She paused. How long have you been watching? Long enough to see the tire. She looked at him for a long time with the eyes he had first recognized across this very counter, and Cole held that gaze the way you hold something that could go either way depending on how carefully you handle the next few seconds. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. I don't know how to let someone I have been doing this myself for a very long time. I don't know how to hand any part of it over. You don't have to hand anything over, Cole said. You make the decisions. My chapter provides resources and support. You stay in charge of your own life. That's not negotiable on my end. Why? Because Ray didn't ask me to take over your life. He asked me to be there for you. There's a difference, right then? Something in her expression shifted, not dramatic but real. Some small interior grip relaxed by a degree. There's something else, Cole said. Something I found out that's yours to know. She waited. Your son, Danny. I know what happened 3 years ago. You don't have to explain anything. But I found a treatment facility in Albuquerque that has his record as a patient. And I know there's an envelope in your kitchen drawer that's been there for 6 months. Agnes went very still. Cole kept his voice level. I haven't opened it. I haven't contacted him. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know that I know, and because you deserve to make whatever decision you want to make about that situation without feeling like it's hidden. The silence stretched. He hit me, she said, very quiet. I know. He was not in his right mind. I understand that. I understood it at the time. She looked at the counter. But knowing something in your head and knowing it in your body are different things. And my body remembers. Yes. I keep the letter there because I can't throw it away and I can't open it. Every day I walk in, I see it and I think, what if it says he's gone? What if it says he's worse? What if it says he's sorry and I open it and I have to deal with being sorry back? She stopped. What if it says nothing I know how to respond to? Cole said nothing. He understood what she needed from him in this moment, which was not advice and not solutions, and not the particular form of helpfulness that involves fixing things without being asked. What she needed was someone to hear it, someone to hold it with her without immediately trying to put it down. After a while, she said, You knew Ray better than almost anyone. Then tell me about him. Not the official version, the real one. Cole talked for a long time. He told her about Ray's laugh, which was the loudest sound in any room he entered, and which had no social awareness whatsoever. Ray would start laughing in situations where laughing was deeply inadvisable and could not stop himself. He told her about the poker. Ray had a system for losing the first 5 hands deliberately to establish a certain impression, and then winning the next 15 methodically. The whole unit had eventually figured it out, and they still couldn't beat him. He told her that Ray had kept her photograph inside his helmet, that before every patrol he'd reach in and touch the edge of it just a fingertip, just a second. He told her that Ray had taught every younger man in the unit how to write a proper letter home, had sat with them and told them what to say and what not to say, and how to make the person reading it feel connected without worrying. Ray had understood at 26 something that many people twice his age never grasped, that the people waiting at home were fighting their own battle and deserved to be treated as fellow soldiers, not as civilians to be protected from the truth. He told her about the day 3 days before Ray died when a care package had arrived from home, containing, among other things, 6 dozen homemade cookies wrapped in wax paper. Ray had sat down with that box and looked at it for a full minute before opening it. Then he'd stood up and walked through the tent, handing them out one by one to every man present, including men from other units he barely knew, keeping only a handful for himself. He had said to no one in particular that his sister's cookies were the finest object that had ever existed, and that it would be wrong to keep them from people who needed them. Agnes was crying by this point. The way she cried quietly, the tears finding their way down her face while the rest of her remained composed. He always did that, she said. He always gave everything away. I used to get so angry at him. I'd spend a week saving butter to make him cookies, and he'd give them to strangers. He said you'd understand. She laughed, a real laugh, brief and surprised, the laugh of someone discovering an emotion they hadn't expected. He was right. I'd be furious and then I'd understand. He knew me. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. He always knew me better than I knew him. They sat in the quiet diner as the late afternoon light moved across the floor in long angles, and Cole told her the last part carefully. He did not spare her the difficulty of it because Agnes Webb was not someone who needed to be spared things. He told her about the shrapnel, about the cover they'd sheltered behind, about the particular quality of the silence that fell after the explosion before they understood what had happened. He told her about holding Ray while the blood spread across the sand, about how Ray had been completely present the entire time, not delirious, not frightened, just urgent, just focused on the one thing he needed to say. He told her what Ray had said, all of it. Agnes listened without looking away. When Cole finished, she sat very still for a long moment. He was more scared for me than for himself, she said. Yes, that's very Ray. She nodded slowly, a nod that seemed to be the physical expression of something settling into place, some long, unsettled thing, finding the position it had always been trying to reach. I'm going to let you help me, she said. Not because I need saving. Because Ray trusted you with the most important thing he had to give, and you've been carrying it for 33 years, and I think it's time you put some of it down. Cole held that for a moment. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If your people find something wrong, or you try to make decisions for me without asking, I'll tell you exactly what I think. I expect nothing less. She stood and picked up the coffee pot and refilled both their cups, though neither cup needed it. It was her way of marking a transition Cole was beginning to understand. The coffee was punctuation. Over the next 10 days, with the clock moving from 19 days to 9, Rex's contacts worked through the Victor Crane documentation. Knox's cousin at the assessor's office confirmed the legal weight of Exhibit C. Cole found a Flagstaff attorney named Doris Whitfield, 61 years old, formerly of the Mohave County Public Defender's Office with a reputation for doggedness in property cases, who agreed to take Agnes's case on a sliding scale. Doris Whitfield reviewed the Decker will within 48 hours and called Cole with 3 words, "The addendum holds." Cole relayed this to Agnes. Then he drove to Kingman and sat with her at the same counter while Doris Whitfield explained on speakerphone exactly what Agnes's rights were, what the legal process would look like, and what Shane Decker's attorney had failed to disclose. Agnes listened without interrupting, asked 3 precise questions at the end, and said she understood. When the call ended, she said, "Now what?" "Now we talk to Shane." She looked at him. "You think that will work?" Cole thought about the picture that had assembled itself of Shane Decker over the past 2 weeks, the football career ended too young, the gambling that had filled the space where ambition used to live, the debt that had turned a mediocre young man into a desperate one. He thought about what desperate young men look like, having been in proximity to several of them in situations considerably more pressured than this one. "I think Shane Decker is a man who got handed a way out of a bad situation and grabbed it without reading the fine print," Cole said. "I think if we sit across from him and show him what he actually signed up for, not just the debt he knows about, but what Victor Crane actually is, what happens to the people Crane uses when they stop being useful, I think there's a chance he makes a different choice." Agnes considered this. "And if he doesn't, then we have Doris Whitfield, and we have enough documentation on Crane to make this transaction very complicated for anyone who wants to move quickly. Nobody operates fast under legal scrutiny." She looked at him for a long moment. "Ray said you were the best Marine he ever served with." Ray was generous. Ray was accurate. He was many things, but he wasn't generous with assessments of ability. She stood, set up the meeting. Cole called Shane Decker's personal cell number. Shane answered on the 3rd ring with the guarded voice of a young man who had been fielding calls he didn't want to receive for several months. Cole said his name. There was a pause. "What do you want?" Shane said. "A conversation. Just the 2 of us. No attorneys. I have information you need to hear about Victor Crane, and I think when you've heard it, you'll want to talk about different options." Another pause longer. "Why would you do that?" "Because what you've gotten yourself into is considerably more dangerous than you understand, and getting out of it while you can is better for you, not just for her." The pause that followed was the pause of a young man doing the math on how much worse things could realistically get and arriving at an uncomfortable answer. "Where?" Shane said. They met at a coffee shop in Kingman 2 days later, with 8 days remaining on the eviction notice. Shane Decker in person was thinner than his photograph suggested, with the particular hollowness of someone who had not been sleeping or eating properly for months. He had his father's jaw, and beneath the defensive posturing, the eyes of a man who was exhausted by the version of himself he'd been performing. Cole sat across from him and put a folder on the table. "What's in there?" Shane said. "Victor Crane's actual business history, not the public version. The one that involves 2 federal investigations that didn't quite reach charges, 3 associates with significant criminal history, and a pattern of land acquisition that functions as a vehicle for moving money of questionable origin through property transactions. Cole kept his voice even. You've been helping him force an elderly woman off land she's occupied for 25 years, so that he can use it as a financial instrument. You've been doing this without knowing what you were actually helping him do. Shane's jaw tightened. That's not what he told me. That's not what he told you, Cole agreed. He told you he was a developer. He told you the land was valuable. Both of those things are true in a narrow technical sense. What he didn't tell you is that the federal interest in him is active and recent, and that when investigators move on someone like Crane, they move on everyone connected to recent transactions first. He paused. You'd be first. Shane was looking at the folder. His hands were flat on the table, projecting a calm he didn't feel. You came here to scare me, Shane said. I came here to give you information your own attorney has been withholding from you. What you do with it is your decision. Cole reached into the folder and pulled out a single page, a copy of Exhibit C from Howard Decker's will. Your father put this in his will, right of first refusal for Agnes Webb, long-term tenant, at a price derived from cumulative rent. Your attorney buried it. You have a legal obligation to disclose it and offer her the option before you can complete any sale. Shane stared at the page. Your father knew Agnes for 25 years, Cole said. Quiet, not an accusation, a fact. He knew what she'd paid. He knew what she'd built. He put that addendum in his will because he wanted her to have a fair chance. He paused. He was honoring a relationship. Shane picked up the page, read it again. Something moved through his face, the particular expression of a person recognizing that they have been doing something they would not recognize as themselves if they could see it from outside. I needed the money, Shane said. His voice had gone quiet. I needed it badly. I know. He left me debt I didn't know about, and a property I didn't know how to manage, and a guy shows up offering a number that makes the debt go away, and he set the page down. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't ask questions. I know, Cole said again, but you were hurting her specifically, whatever the intention was. Shane was quiet for a long time. What do I do? He said. Cole had thought about this carefully. You call your attorney and you tell him you've reviewed the will in full and you're aware of Exhibit C. You tell him you'll be disclosing it to Agnes Webb's legal representation. You acknowledge the right of first refusal. You give Agnes the option to purchase at the calculated price. He paused. That gets you out of a transaction that will eventually connect your name to a federal investigation. Shane absorbed this. Kelso, I still owe Kelso. $93,000 doesn't cover all of it, I know. But my chapter has resources and connections, and there are legitimate ways to restructure that debt through proper channels. That's a separate conversation for a separate day. This one is about Agnes. Shane looked at the page from his father's will. He put that in there for her, he said. Yes. Shane nodded slowly. One nod, the way his father would have nodded, the nod of a man who has arrived at a decision he doesn't entirely like, but recognizes as correct. Okay, Shane said. I'll call the attorney today. Cole drove back to the chapter clubhouse and told Rex and Bishop and Knox what had happened. The room absorbed it in the quiet way the chapter absorbed good news, which was with minimal celebration and immediate attention to what came next. It's not over, Rex said. Shane signing off on the right of first refusal is a start, but Agnes still needs to come up with $93,000. She doesn't have it, Cole said. No, but we know people who believe in what she represents. Rex looked around the table. Veterans networks, civic groups, the chapter has done fundraising before. The calls went out that evening and the next morning through networks that Cole had been part of for 15 years, veteran organizations in 3 states, civic associations in Mojave County, people who had been helped over the years by Cole and his brothers, and who had filed that fact away for the day when they might be asked for something in return. The first donations came in within 24 hours, not large individual amounts, $50 here, $100 there. The accumulation of a community deciding without announcement or ceremony that Agnes Webb's 25 years of service and quiet dignity were worth showing up for. Cole told Agnes about the right of first refusal. He sat across from her at the counter and laid it out clearly, what Howard had done, what it meant legally, what the chapter had begun working on. Agnes listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I don't want charity, she said. It's not charity, it's community. Cole looked at her. There is a difference. Charity is given to people who are seen as helpless. Community is what people give to someone they've decided is worth standing with. He paused. You've been serving this community for 40 years. The community is choosing to stand with you. That's reciprocity. Agnes considered this with the careful attention she gave everything. All right, she said. She went back to work. Cole drove back toward Flagstaff in the early evening, the desert going purple and gold around him. And for the first time since Diane Caraway's call at 4:30 in the morning 10 days ago, something in his chest had loosened by a degree he hadn't expected. His phone buzzed. Rex. Shane's attorney called Doris Whitfield's office this afternoon. He's acknowledged the addendum. The clock on the eviction is suspended pending the formal option process. Cole sent back one word, Roger. He pulled off the highway at the scenic overlook above the valley and sat on the Harley and looked out at the landscape that he had lived in for 9 years, and that Agnes Webb had lived in for 9 years, and that Route 66 had threaded through for decades before either of them. He took out Ray's dog tags, held them in his palm. Still working on it, Hawk, he said. The wind came up from the south, carrying the last warmth of the afternoon with it, and Cole sat there for a while in the quiet of the desert and allowed himself to feel briefly the sensation of something that had been going the wrong direction for a very long time, beginning carefully, provisionally, not yet safely to turn. He was 4 miles from the Dusty Road diner when his phone rang. Patty Briggs. The voice on the other end was compressed, urgent with the specific urgency of someone fighting to stay calm. Cole, Shane Decker just walked into the diner with 3 friends. They've been drinking, I can tell. Agnes is closing alone. A breath sharp. He took scissors from behind the counter. Cole, he has them out. Cole's hand was already on the throttle. Call Rex right now, he said. Tell him to bring everyone. He did not wait for an answer. He opened the Harley up on the empty highway, the engine's voice rising from rumble to roar, the headlight cutting the dark ahead. He had been 4 miles from the Dusty Road diner. He had been watching and waiting and doing the right thing, the careful way, the patient way, the way that honored Agnes's need to stand on her own terms. He thought about a promise, about 7 minutes in sand in a dying man's voice. He thought about 33 years. He rode. The 7 Harleys came off Route 66 in a single-line engines, running hard headlights, cutting the dark in parallel beams that swept across the Dusty Road diner's parking lot like the beams of a lighthouse, finally finding what it had been turning toward. Cole was already ahead of the others. He had ridden the 4 miles flat out alone, arriving 60 seconds before them, and in those 60 seconds, he had not gone inside. He had stood at the window and looked through the glass and made himself see everything before he acted, because he had learned in circumstances considerably more violent than this one, that the first man through the door sets the tone for everything that follows, and the tone he needed to set tonight was not the one his hands were suggesting. Shane Decker was circling Agnes in the center of the diner, scissors open in his right hand, moving the way a man moves when he has been building towards something all afternoon and has finally committed to it past the point where backing down feels possible. Agnes sat in the corner booth with her hands flat on the table and her back straight and her eyes tracking Shane with the level, unflinching attention of a woman who had developed over decades a quality of stillness that was not passivity, but its precise opposite. 3 strands of silver hair lay on the linoleum near her feet. Shane's 3 companions stood behind him, young drunk, not leading but not leaving, held in place by the particular social gravity of having come this far with someone and not yet found the moment to pull away. Patty Briggs was pressed against the far wall near the coffee station, her phone in both hands, her face the color of the wall behind her. Cole saw all of this in the 10 seconds he stood at the window. Then the other 6 bikes pulled in and cut their engines in sequence one after the other, the sound dying in the parking lot like a wave spinning itself on a shore, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing Cole had heard in a long time. He heard Shane's voice and said, "Go quiet." Cole pushed the door open. He did not rush. He did not announce himself. He simply walked across the threshold at the pace of a man who is entirely certain of where he is going and has decided some time ago that certainty is more useful than speed. Behind him, Rex came through next, and then Bishop and Knox and Wade and Gunner, and one more 7 men in leather cuts filling the entrance of a small Route 66 diner, the way weather fills a room, not loudly, not with threat, but with the kind of presence that changes the air pressure and makes the walls feel closer. Shane's hand froze on the scissors. Cole took 3 steps forward, not towards Shane, just into the space, establishing presence without establishing confrontation. Behind him, the 6 men spread out without being told, simply present a wall of people who had chosen through whatever roads had brought them here to be in this room tonight for this woman. Shane said, "You think you scare me?" Cole said, "No." The word was so flat and so complete that it stopped whatever Shane had been building toward. He had expected something, a challenge, a threat, a version of this confrontation that followed a script he could respond to. Colesno offered him nothing to push against. I think you're scared already, Cole said. I think you've been scared for months, and tonight you're doing the things scared people do when they've run out of other options. You're trying to make someone else feel as small as you feel. Shane's hand tightened on the scissors. Your father, Cole said, would not recognize you right now. The words hit. Cole had not said them to wound. He had said them because they were true and because Shane Decker was a young man whose father's opinion had mattered to him more than most things, and because the truth delivered without anger has a weight that cruelty cannot match. Shane's arm lowered by a degree. I don't need a lecture from a biker, Shane said. His voice had already lost the force it had carried 30 seconds ago. You're right, Cole said. You don't. You need someone to tell you that the way you're doing this is making everything worse, and that there are still options that don't end with you in handcuffs and Agnes on the street, but that those options close the longer you stand here with those scissors in your hand. The youngest of Shane's three companions, maybe 19, with the look of someone who had come along tonight because the alternative was admitting he wasn't sure about any of this, took a step backward. His eyes went to Agnes, to the hair on the floor, to the old woman sitting in the booth with her back straight and her hands flat on the table. Something moved through his face that had nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with the particular moral clarity that arrives sometimes without warning in the middle of things you should not have started. Mrs. Webb, the young man said. His voice broke on the last syllable. I'm sorry, my grandfather was a Marine. He told me real men protect women, they don't hurt them. He stopped, wiped his face with the back of his hand. I'm so sorry, ma'am. He walked to the door and went out into the parking lot, and the sound of him going changed the room the way the first piece, leaving a structure, always changes it, not collapse, but a new awareness of what holds and what doesn't. The second man left without speaking. He pulled his jacket tighter and looked at the floor and went through the door in the way of someone who is ashamed and has decided that leaving fast is the most honest thing he can do. The third man stood a moment longer. He looked at Shane. He looked at Agnes. Then he said to Agnes specifically and not to the room, this wasn't supposed to go this far. I thought we were just going to scare her. I didn't know about the scissors. I should have stopped it when I saw. He swallowed. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry. He left. And then it was just Shane alone in the center of the Dusty Road diner, with 7 Hells Angels standing at the perimeter and Agnes in the corner booth, and the scissors still in his right hand, and 3 strands of silver hair on the linoleum as evidence of what he had already done tonight that could not be undone. The scissors came down, not thrown, not dropped dramatically, just lowered slowly until his hand opened and they clattered to the floor, and Shane Decker stood there without them, looking considerably smaller than he had 2 minutes ago. Cole walked to the scissors and picked them up and set them on the counter. Then he pulled out the booth chair across from Agnes and looked at Shane. Sit down, he said. It was not a command. It was an invitation offered to a man who was out of other places to go. Shane sat down. Agnes was looking at him from across the table with the expression of a woman who has been hurt and is not pretending otherwise, but who is also beneath the hurt possessed of a quality of perception that does not simplify people into the worst things they have done. She had watched her husband destroy himself with alcohol and had never stopped loving him while also never pretending he wasn't doing it. She had watched her son choose pills over his family and had never stopped loving him while also knowing what it had cost her. Agnes Webb had spent 78 years learning the complicated truth that the people who hurt you are almost always underneath the hurt they cause, fighting something you can only partially see. Look at me, she said to Shane. He raised his head. Ma'am. His eyes were red. The alcohol was still in him, but it had shifted quality, the false confidence gone, leaving only the thing it had been covering. He was not a dangerous young man anymore. He was a frightened one, which was what he had been all along. You hurt me tonight, Agnes said. Her voice was level, not cold. Level in the way of a woman who has decided to say exactly what is true and nothing more and nothing less. You came into my place of work and you put your hands on me and you cut my hair and you stood over me like I was less than a person. I have been coming to work in this diner for 40 years. I have made coffee for 3 generations of people who drive this highway, and I have never once in 40 years had someone treat me the way you treated me tonight. I want you to understand that. I want you to hold that. Shane's face crumpled. Not gradually. All at once, the way faces crumple when the last piece of something internal finally gives way. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out broken. "I'm sorry, you never did anything to me. You were a good tenant. You paid every month. You kept everything up. You were exactly what my father said you were, and I tried to destroy you because I was scared. And I thought—" He stopped. His shoulders heaved once. "I thought if I did it fast enough and didn't think about it, it would just be a transaction. But I knew the whole time." He put his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The diner was very quiet. Rex, standing near the door, had his arms crossed and his face arranged in the particular expression of a man witnessing something that is going in the right direction and requiring from him nothing further except continued presence. Cole stood by the counter. Agnes reached across the table and placed her weathered hand on Shane's. Not a gentle gesture, not a comfort, exactly the hand of a woman who has decided that what this moment requires is contact reality, the physical fact of another person present. "Look at me again," she said. He looked up. "Your father was a good man. Howard Decker treated me with dignity for 25 years. He fixed things without being asked. He never raised the rent in all that time. When I was sick in 2019 and I couldn't afford the surgery copay, he paid it. He told me it was a billing error." She paused. "I knew it wasn't a billing error. He paid it because he understood that people who show up and do their part deserve to be looked after. That was who your father was." Something moved through Shane's face, a specific physical pain. Cole reached into his jacket and set a piece of paper on the table beside them. A photocopy of a hospital billing record. Name of guarantor, Howard Decker. Date, March 2019. Agnes did not look at it. She had not known about it. Cole had found it through Doris Whitfield's document requests. Shane picked it up, read it, set it back down with the careful movements of a man handling something that has just changed the shape of everything he thought he understood about the past 6 months. "He never told me," Shane said. "He wouldn't have. That's not how he operated." Agnes's voice had softened by a degree, not into forgiveness, but into something close to its perimeter. "He did what was right because it was right. He didn't need credit for it." Shane stared at the billing record. "I've been trying to tear down what he built. I've been selling off everything he worked for. I told myself it was practical. I told myself he'd understand because the situation was impossible." He set the paper down. "But this is what he thought practical meant, taking care of the people who depended on him." He looked at Agnes directly. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," Agnes said. "You don't, not yet." She withdrew her hand from his. "But you can earn it. It starts with tonight. It starts with going to the sheriff and telling him what happened and accepting what comes next. Not because you have to, because it's the first step in the direction your father would recognize." Shane nodded, one slow nod, the nod of a young man who has arrived through wreckage at a decision that cost him something real. Cole picked up his phone and called Sheriff Wade Donnelly. Donnelly had been sheriff of Mojave County for 8 years, a former military police officer who had known Cole through the chapter's veteran outreach work and who had the particular quality of law enforcement experience that produces men who understand the difference between what happened and what needs to happen next. "I'm at the Dusty Road Diner," Cole said. "I've got a situation that's been handled and 2 young men who want to do the right thing on the other end of it. Can you come without sirens?" Donnelly came without sirens. While they waited, Patty Briggs came out from her position by the wall and picked up the broom from behind the counter without being asked and began quietly to sweep up the strands of silver hair from the linoleum. She did not make a production of it. She swept them up and put them in the dustpan and emptied the dustpan into the trash in the simple dignity of the act. The cleaning up of what had been done, the restoration of the floor to what it should have been, was the most useful thing anyone did in those 20 minutes of waiting. Agnes went to the bathroom. She came back with her face washed and her hair tied back in what remained, and she held her head the way she always held her head, which was at the precise angle of a woman who had decided every morning for 40 years that whatever the day required, she would meet it upright. Sheriff Donnelly arrived with 1 deputy. He took in the room 7 bikers, 2 young men, an elderly woman, the lingering evidence of what had been swept from the floor, and said to Cole in the tone of a man who has seen Cole Maddox in complicated situations before, "One of these days you're going to have a quiet Tuesday." "Not this one," Cole said. Shane and his remaining companion gave their statements at a corner table, while the deputy took statements from Agnes and Patty. Shane was clear and complete in what he said. He did not minimize and he did not redirect. He described what he had done in the flat declarative sentences of a man who has decided that honesty is the only form of restitution available to him at this particular moment. Before the deputy walked him out, Shane stopped. He turned back toward Agnes, who was standing near the counter. Mrs. Webb, she looked at him. I know you asked for leniency in whatever statement you give tonight. I'm going to spend whatever time I have, going forward, trying to be what my father would have recognized. He stopped. His voice was unsteady but present. I don't know if that's possible, but I'm going to try. Agnes looked at him for a long moment. That's all any of us can do, she said. Try. Fail. Try again. Shane Decker went out to the sheriff's car. The knight received him without ceremony. Cole helped Agnes onto the back of his Harley. She had never ridden a motorcycle before this night, and he showed her how to hold on not around his waist like in the movies, but gripping the handholds at the back of the seat, leaning with the bike rather than against it, trusting the physics of the thing even when everything in you says not to. You trust me, he asked. She considered this in the way she considered everything seriously without performance. With my life, she said. They rode through the desert night, not fast, steady. The wind was cool and carried the sage smell that the desert gives off after dark when the day's heat releases from the rock and the soil, and Agnes Webb rode with her head up and her hands steady on the grips, and behind them the 6 other Harleys followed at a respectful distance, spread across the lane in loose formation, headlights moving through the dark like a constellation that had decided to take a different shape. Cole brought her to her trailer. He walked her to the door and she turned on the step and looked at him in the light from the single bulb above the entrance. Thank you, she said, for tonight, for all of it. That's what family does, Cole said. She touched his face. A brief touch, one hand against his jaw, the gesture of a woman who has been careful with her affections for a very long time and is in this small way choosing to be less careful. Ray chose well, she said. He always chose well, but you're stronger than he ever told me. And he told me plenty. She went inside. Cole waited until the light came on, the warm yellow light of the interior moving through the thin curtains over the window, and then he stood in the desert dark outside a single-wide trailer on rented land in Kingman, Arizona, and felt the particular quality of this moment, which was not triumphant, not resolved, but quietly, provisionally, honestly, better than anything he had felt in a very long time. He took out the dog tags, held them in the dark. Found her hawk, he said. She's home. She's going to be okay. The desert said nothing back, but the wind moved through the creosote brush along the fence line with a sound that was, if you were in the right state of mind, to hear it not entirely unlike the sound of someone breathing freely for the first time in a while. The 2 months that followed had the quality of time that moves quickly, because it is full of things that matter each day, carrying its own weight and depositing it somewhere useful. Victor Crane was arrested on federal charges 12 days after the night at the diner, in a proceeding that involved agents from 2 different federal agencies and had been, according to the brief report in the Kingman Daily Miner, the result of an ongoing investigation. Rex had said nothing about this publicly. He sent Cole a text message consisting of 2 words, done clean. The fundraising effort reached $91,000 in 18 days. The remaining $2,000 arrived separately in a money order with no note from an address in Albuquerque that Cole recognized because he had found it in the county tax records when he was tracing Danny Webb Jr.'s whereabouts. Danny had sent the last $2,000 from his savings. It was, Cole thought, the most expensive and the most meaningful $2,000 in the entire 93. Doris Whitfield moved the legal process with the doggedness she was known for. The right of first refusal was exercised formally. Shane's new attorney, not Victor Crane's attorney, who had withdrawn from the representation with considerable speed once the federal investigation became publicly known, cooperated with the process. The land transfer was recorded in the Mojave County Assessor's Office on a Tuesday afternoon in November, with Agnes Webb as the new owner of the property on which she had lived for 25 years, and Patty Briggs as co-owner of the Dusty Road Diner property, which had been bundled into the same transaction under a separate clause that Knox's legal research had identified. Cole had called Danny Webb Jr. 4 weeks after the night at the diner. He had gotten the number from the treatment facility in Albuquerque through a contact in the Veteran Outreach Network. Danny had served 2 years in the Army before the accident, which had given him veteran status, and through it, access to the facility's program. Cole had called and said simply that his mother needed him, that the situation was stable. But that stable was not the same as whole, and that if Danny was in a place where he could come, he should come. Danny had said, "Does she want me to?" Cole had said, She kept your letter for 6 months without opening it because she was afraid of wanting you back too much. You tell me. Danny had been quiet for a long time on the phone. Then he'd said he would drive down the following week. Cole had not told Agnes. He had arranged it the way he arranged most things he cared about, carefully, quietly, without announcement, trusting that the right moment would make itself known. The right moment had come on the night after Shane Decker's arrest, when Cole drove Agnes back to the trailer, and she opened the letter at the kitchen table with her hands shaking slightly, and read it and sat very still for a long time, and then looked at Cole with an expression that asked without words whether this was real or whether the universe was offering hope that would dissolve on contact. Cole had gone to the door and opened it. Danny Webb Jr. was standing at the end of the trailer's short walkway under the light of the park's single lamp, his hands in the pockets of a jacket that was a size too large, looking at his mother's door, with the expression of a man who has practiced being brave about this and is discovering that practice only takes you so far. He was 38 years old, and he had the look of a man who has been through something that changed the shape of his face and has made peace with the new shape thinner than he'd once been, with eyes that held both damage and the particular clarity that sometimes not always follows it. Agnes had not moved for 3 seconds. Then she had walked down the steps and across the short distance between them, and she had put her arms around her son, and Danny Webb Jr. had stood there for a moment like a man who cannot quite believe the thing that is happening and is waiting for it to stop being real. And then he had held on, and the sound that came out of him was not a word and not any identifiable thing, just the sound of something that had been wound very tight for a very long time, beginning finally to release. Cole had stood in the doorway of the trailer and watched, and then he had stepped back inside and let the night hold him for as long as it needed to, because this was not his moment, and he had the wisdom finally to know it. He thought in those minutes, standing in the small kitchen with the unopened letter on the table and the sound of Agnes and her son outside in the dark, about what Ray had actually asked of him. Not the simple version, find her, protect her. The larger version, the one implicit in every word Ray had said in those 7 minutes. Make sure she has someone. Make sure the woman who took care of me when our parents died doesn't have to take care of herself forever with no one watching her back. He had kept it. Late. Imperfectly. Through years of wrong turns and dead ends, and the particular loneliness of carrying something important in a direction that seemed to lead nowhere. But he had kept it. The courtroom in Kingman was not large. It had wood paneling that was slightly too dark for the room, and fluorescent lighting that added nothing to the aesthetic, in a gallery that held on most days a scattering of the professionally curious and the personally invested. On the morning of Shane Decker's sentencing, the gallery was full. Cole sat in the front row with Agnes on his left and Rex on his right. Behind them, in the rows that filled progressively with people who had driven in from Kingman and Flagstaff, and 2 or 3 of the smaller communities along that stretch of Route 66, were members of the chapter, faces Cole knew from 15 years of brotherhood, and faces he didn't know, people who had heard about Agnes Webb through the fundraising network and the veteran outreach channels, in the particular way that word moves in communities that are small enough to be networked, but large enough to have forgotten how networked they actually are. Shane had been in the county jail for 2 months. He was thinner than he had been at any point Cole had seen him, but he carried himself with a quality of attention that had not been present before, the quality of a man who has stopped avoiding the truth about himself and is finding the experience painful in ways that are perhaps productive. The counseling program at the jail had a director who, by all reports, was worth the funding. Shane had attended every session. He had, according to the program director's letter to the court, demonstrated genuine engagement with the process rather than the performed engagement that characterized many residents. Judge Patricia Wren read the charges: assault, criminal harassment, trespassing. Shane had pleaded guilty to all 3 without negotiation at the arraignment. He had not asked for reduced charges. He had asked for a fair sentence and accepted in advance whatever that meant. Before she delivered the sentence, Judge Wren looked at the documents in front of her. I've reviewed Mrs. Webb's victim impact statement, she said, and I've read the letters of remorse submitted by the defendant. I've also spoken at length with the director of the jail's counseling program about Mr. Decker's participation over the past 2 months. She paused in the way judges pause when they are about to say something that will surprise at least one party in the room. The law requires me to take seriously the harm that was done. It also requires me to consider the realistic path toward that harm being addressed in a meaningful way. I believe those 2 things point in the same direction in this case. She gave him 18 months with credit for 2 months served. Eligibility for work release at 6 months pending behavior review. 5 years probation. 500 hours of community service. Mandatory counseling for the duration of the sentence. Shane's attorney leaned over and said something. Shane shook his head without looking at him. He turned to face the gallery. He found Agnes in the front row and held her gaze with the steadiness of a man who has been practicing this specific kind of accountability for 2 months and has decided it is the only kind worth having. "Mrs. Webb," he said. His voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they have been prepared carefully and mean what they say. "I know you asked the court for leniency. I know what that cost you to ask. I don't deserve it. But I am going to spend every day of whatever comes next proving that the chance you gave me was not wasted." Agnes nodded, once. The nod of a woman who has received what she asked for and intends to hold the recipient to it. Before they led Shane out, he looked at Cole. Across the courtroom, across the distance between where they stood in their respective lives, he held Cole's gaze for a moment and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Cole nodded once. The debt was not paid. Debts like this were never fully paid. But the direction of travel had changed, and that was something real. The renaming of the Dusty Road Diner happened on a Saturday in late November, when the Arizona desert was doing what it does in November, which is remind you that it has more than one mode, and that the one involving cold, clear air and a sky so blue it looks artificial is in its own right as striking as the summer version. 200 people came. Cole had not expected 200 people. He had expected the chapter Agnes's regulars, a few community members. What arrived was something larger than that, the particular gathering that occurs when a story has moved through a community deeply enough that people feel personally invested in its resolution, even if their connection to it is peripheral. Veterans in dress uniforms, families who had been stopping at this diner for decades, the woman from Agnes's church who had told her about Exhibit C, Gerald the trucker who had been coming to the Dusty Road Diner on his Route 66 run for 11 years, and who stood near the back wearing a clean button-down shirt that had clearly been pressed for the occasion. Rex stood at the front of the gathered crowd with a folded flag in his hands. It was not a new flag. It was the flag that had been draped over Ray Sutton's casket at Arlington in 1991, 34 years ago, returned to his family finally after Agnes had written to the appropriate Veterans Administration office, and after months of bureaucratic correspondence that Doris Whitfield had helped navigate received it back. Rex had the voice of a man who had led people in difficult circumstances and understood that the right words delivered at the right pace carry weight that elaborate oratory cannot match. "Brothers and sisters and friends," he began, and the crowd settled into the particular quiet of people who have come to hear something true. "We're here today to honor a man who gave his life 34 years ago in a desert 7,000 miles from this one. Sergeant Raymond Sutton, United States Marine Corps. He died saving the life of his fellow Marine, the man standing to my right. And in the 7 minutes before he died, the only thing he talked about was his sister." He turned to Agnes. She stepped forward. She was wearing her work dress and her apron because she had said when Cole asked her what she planned to wear, that Ray had known her as a woman who worked, and she saw no reason to be anything else today. Her hair had grown back in the 2 months since the night at the diner, shorter now, and suited to her the silver of it, catching the November sunlight in a way that looked at this angle almost like something intentional. Rex placed the flag in her hands. She took it the way you take something you have been waiting for long enough, that the waiting has become part of who you are, and she pressed it to her chest, and for a moment she closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked at the crowd. "My brother wrote me letters every week from Kuwait," she said. "Every single week without fail. He told me about the desert. He told me about the men in his unit. He told me about a Marine named Cole who he said was the best man he had ever served with." She paused. "Ray believed in people. He believed in them specifically by name with the full force of who he was. He believed in Cole enough to give him the heaviest thing he had to give." She looked at Cole, who was standing to her left, with his hands loose at his sides and his face doing the thing it does when a man is feeling something he has not yet found the language for. It took 33 years, but Cole kept that belief. He kept it when it cost him everything. He kept it when there was no reason left to keep it except that it was his to keep. She turned back to the crowd. "This diner has been my life for 40 years. It has been survival and community, and the place where I learned what I was made of, which turned out to be more than I thought." She gestured toward the new sign above the door, covered still by a length of canvas. "Today it becomes something more than that. Today it becomes a promise kept, a place where veterans eat for free, where the lost can find a table, where people who are carrying something heavy can set it down for an hour, and drink a cup of coffee and be reminded that somebody knows their name. She reached up and pulled the canvas cord. The sign came down. Hawk's Table Diner. Below it, smaller but clearly legible, in memory of Sergeant Raymond Hawk Sutton, USMC, 1964-1991. The applause that followed was the kind of applause that happens when a crowd is not performing appreciation, but expressing it, the real thing, uncoordinated and genuine, and slightly ragged at the edges in the way of all things that come from actual feeling rather than social obligation. Cole stepped forward and fixed the brass plaque beside the door. He had worked on the wording for 2 weeks, had shown it to Rex and to Doris Whitfield, and finally to Agnes, who had read it and said yes. That's right, that's exactly right. Family isn't who you're born to, it's who you'd bleed for. Sergeant Raymond Hawk Sutton, USMC. The diner doors open. Inside, the booths had been refurbished, the walls repainted in warm colors that were different from the old ones, but felt somehow continuous with them, the same soul in a refreshed body. The counter was the same counter. The coffee maker was the same machine. The photograph of Route 66 in the 1950s hung behind the register, straightened now, back to its proper angle. New photographs had joined it, Ray in his dress blues, Robert Webb in his uniform. And beside them a new one, Cole and Agnes at the memorial bench, smiling the way people smile when the thing they are sitting with is too large for a single expression, and the smile is just the part that made it to the surface. Behind the counter, working the grill with the focused concentration of a man for whom this work is not a placeholder, but an act of meaning, was Danny Webb Jr. He wore a clean cook's apron, and he worked the grill with the efficiency of someone who had spent his 22 months of sobriety learning, among other things, that doing something well with your hands is one of the most reliable forms of staying present. When he looked up and caught Agnes's eye across the counter, something passed between them. Not words, not the elaborate vocabulary of a complicated relationship being renegotiated, just the simple acknowledgement of two people who have been through the worst of each other and have chosen carefully to be here anyway. After the ceremony, after the speeches and the food and the veterans who ate for free at the counter and the families in the booths and Gerald the trucker who had 2 pieces of apple pie and declared them the finest things he'd eaten in 30 years on the road, Cole walked out to the parking lot. He stood there in the November afternoon, the desert stretching out beyond the highway in every direction, the rock formations catching the low angle of the sun and turning their familiar colors. He could hear the diner behind him, the sound of people talking and silverware, and the particular warm noise of a room being well used by people who are glad to be in it. He took out Ray's dog tags. He had been carrying them for 33 years. He had carried them through the Marines and through 2 overseas contracts, and through his marriage to Carol, and through her death, and through 15 years of the Hells Angels, and through 247 wrong addresses and 1 right one. They had become part of the physical architecture of his days, so constant a presence that there were hours when he forgot they were there, and other hours when they were all he could feel. He held them in his palm in the afternoon light and looked at them for a long time. He thought about Carol, who had told him from a hospital bed in the last weeks of her life, "Don't stop fighting for people, Cole. Don't stop being the man Ray believed you were." He had promised her, just like he had promised Ray. He had kept both. Agnes came out of the diner behind him. He heard her step on the asphalt. He knew her walk now, the particular rhythm of it, the way it was slightly slower on the left where her hip had been giving her a trouble since September. She came and stood beside him and looked at what was in his hand. They stood there together in the quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking," Agnes said, "about what to do with the extra space. Patty and I have been talking about opening for breakfast earlier. We get veterans coming through on the highway at 5 in the morning with nowhere to stop." "That's a good idea. Danny thinks we should put a board on the wall, names of veterans from Mojave County who didn't come back, so they have somewhere." Cole thought about the wall in his garage covered in X marks, about the different kinds of boards people build to hold the names of the missing. "That's a better idea," he said. Agnes was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Cole." He looked at her. She held out her hand, open, waiting. He understood what she was asking. He had known somewhere beneath the conscious part of knowing that this moment was coming, and he had been moving toward it and away from it simultaneously for weeks, because some things you carry so long that the carrying becomes part of how you understand yourself, and setting them down requires you to figure out who you are without the weight. He placed the dog tags in her palm. She closed her fingers around them, held them the way he had held them for 33 years, with the full awareness of what they contained, which was lighter than you'd expect and heavier than any scale could measure. "They belong here," she said. with family. Cole felt the absence of them against his chest, the place where they had rested for over 3 decades. And it was not the loss he had sometimes imagined it might be. It was more like the feeling of putting down a pack at the end of a very long march, the muscles still holding the memory of the weight, the body slowly reorganizing itself around its absence, finding with some surprise that it was still capable of standing upright without it. "We are that," he said, "aren't we?" "We are," Agnes said. "You're stuck with me now. I hope you understand that." "I can live with that," she smiled. It was the smile of a woman who has been through enough, that her smiles are not simple things, they carry the complexity of everything that preceded them, all the difficult years, in the hard mornings, in the quiet dignity of a life built without adequate resources, but with considerable character. It was the most honest smile Cole had seen since Carol. Rex came out and stood with them. He looked at the empty place at Cole's chest where the dog tags had always been. He said nothing. He simply put a hand on Cole's shoulder and left it there for a moment, the gesture of a man who knows when words are not the right tool and has had enough experience to be comfortable in the silence. Inside the diner, through the plate glass window, Cole could see Danny at the grill and Patty moving between the tables, and a young Marine still in uniform, just off deployment, sitting at the counter, eating the meal that Agnes had set in front of him with the words, "Or welcome home, son. Breakfast is on us." The young Marine had the look Cole recognized, the look of a man who has come back from somewhere that changed him and is not yet sure what the changed version of him is supposed to do with himself in a world that kept moving while he was gone. He was eating slowly, looking at the counter, and Agnes was refilling his coffee and saying something that Cole couldn't hear through the glass, and whatever she was saying was making the young Marine's shoulders come down from where they'd been up around his ears, the defensive posture of someone still waiting for the next thing to require him. Cole watched this for a long moment. He thought about Ray. He thought about what it meant to give someone the thing that costs you the most, not the things that are easy to give, but the ones woven into who you are, the things that have to be surgically removed because they've become part of the structure. He thought about 7 minutes in the desert and a promise made in blood, and the 33 years that followed every mile of them, and what all of it had been moving toward. Not a rescue, not a debt repaid, something more complicated and more real than either of those things. A family assembled from the materials available, a broken promise rebuilt over decades, a woman who had survived everything and deserved to stop surviving alone, a young man finding his way back, a brotherhood of men in leather who showed up when it mattered and asked for nothing in return, a diner on Route 66 that smelled like coffee and bacon, and the particular warmth of a room where someone knows your name. He thought about Carol, about her last clear-eyed instruction, "Don't stop being the man Ray believed you were." He had listened. He had kept going when there was no reason to keep going, except that he had given his word to two people who deserved to have their faith honored. And standing in this parking lot in the November light, with the sound of people and laughter behind him, and the desert stretching out in every direction, and Ray's dog tags finally in the hands where they belonged, Cole Maddox understood something he had been working toward, understanding for 33 years, which was this: the promise had not been a burden. It had been a compass. It had pointed him through every wrong address and every dead end, and every night of watching a lit window from a distance, toward the life he was supposed to be living, toward this woman, toward this family, toward this particular parking lot on Route 66 on a cold November afternoon, with the mountains in the distance and the smell of sage in the air, and the sound of his brother's laughter coming from inside the diner. Ray had not given him an obligation. Ray had given him a direction. Rex said, "Ready to ride." Cole looked at the sign one more time. Hawk's Table. The letters straight and clear in the fading light, the brass plaque beside the door catching the sun. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go home." The 7 Harleys kicked to life in the parking lot of Hawk's Table Diner, the sound of them rising together into the desert evening, like something that had earned the right to be loud in a world that asked too many people to be quiet about the things that mattered most. They pulled out onto Route 66 in a line heading east into the last of the daylight, the road opening ahead of them, the way it had been opening for 100 years, for everyone who had needed somewhere to go. Inside the diner, Agnes Webb stood behind the counter. She had stood behind for 40 years and watched them go, and she held Ray's dog tags in her closed fist. And she did not cry, because she had spent 33 years learning to hold grief and joy in the same hand without confusing them. And what she was feeling now was not grief, and it was not quite joy, but something that contained both and transcended both. It was the feeling of a promise finally completely kept. The feeling of a family assembled from loss and distance and the stubborn refusal of certain people to stop believing in the words they had given, arriving at last at the place where it could simply be what it had always been trying to be. She poured a cup of coffee, set it in front of the young Marine, topped it off without being asked, stood for a moment in the warm light of the diner with the sound of the road outside and the sound of her son's voice from the kitchen calling out that the next order was ready. And Agnes Webb, 78 years old, owner of this land and this counter and this life she had built, one cup at a time, straightened her shoulders in the way she had been straightening them for 40 years and went to work. Outside, the desert held the last of the light for as long as it could, the way the desert always does. Patient, permanent, indifferent to human timelines, but present for all of them anyway, the constant, steady witness to everything that plays out along its length. The mountains turned purple. The first stars appeared. Route 66 stretched out in both directions, the way it had always stretched out, carrying in its asphalt the memory of every person who had driven it, looking for something, a destination, a beginning, a second chance, a way back to someone they'd left too long. 7 sets of headlights moved east along it, now growing smaller. And in the diner behind them, the lights stayed on. They would stay on in the morning. They would stay on every morning after that for as long as Agnes Webb had anything to say about it, which was likely to be a very long time. The dusty road was gone. Hawk's table was here, and the road as it always had kept going.